Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1104B, and today's date is October 18th, 2016, and the title of the episode is, Will the US Move from Defcon 3 to 2 after the US cyber attacks Russia? Now, before I get started, I just want to make an announcement. I uploaded an interview with Mike Maloney. It is on the X22 Report Spotlight YouTube channel. So all you need to do is go over to YouTube, type in X22 Report Spotlight. It'll bring you right to the video. Or you can come over to the x22report.com site. Scroll down a little bit. You'll see the video on the right-hand side. You can play it right there. Or you can go to newssentinel.com. Same thing. Scroll down a little bit. Look over to your right-hand side, and you can play the video there. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, in the past couple of weeks, we are seeing that Wikileaks, they've been dumping Hillary Clinton's emails. And we know that the Clintons are part of the establishment. We understand that she had a server that was hooked up in her home. It was unsecure. And we can see right now, as WikiLeaks continually dumps these emails, the U.S. government central bankers, they don't like this. And we see that John Kerry was pressuring the Ecuadorian government to cut the internet for Julian Assange. Now, when they did this, it activated many different things where they had a backup plan. But we can see from the actions of the U.S. government that they are trying to cover up all their lies from the past. Now, we've said this before, truth is now surfacing. And the truth really hurts. And it is damaging, and it is a force that they can't protect themselves against, because when you have the truth, you can't chip away at it. You can't say it's not the truth, because the truth stands by itself. And there's nothing that can get rid of it. And they're realizing this. But so what they're going to do is they're going to go to great lengths to try to get the information that's coming in from all these different areas. They're going to try to stop it. But they will not be able to do this. And we can see already it's not working at all. And we can see why they want to do this. Remember, the U.S. government central bankers, they've been lying to us for many, many, many years. And they've been conditioning us to think in a certain way. They're educating our young to think in a certain way. And if they lied about one thing, you don't really think they're lying about pretty much everything? Because everything they told us was ridiculous, don't believe it, it's all coming true. Oh, if you go back to 2012 or 2011, they told us that we're not arming the rebels in Syria. We have nothing to do with them. And then we find out they were arming the rebels. Actually, they were supporting the rebels. They were supporting the Islamic State. They were funding the Islamic State. They were funding Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra. I mean, think about all the things they've told us, how they all are a lie. Everything. You can't even name one thing where they were truthful about it. Because whatever they told us, it's wrapped up in other lies. And this is what they're most afraid of, is that they'll be exposed. And we can see they're trying to cover their tracks right now. And as we move closer and closer to these elections, as the economy continually deteriorates, as war is approaching, they're going to try to cover up all of this. And we know one way to do this is to start a war. Because once a war starts, everyone forgets about everything else. Think about what happened during 9/11. There were trillions of dollars missing, and this was on the 10th of September. And all of a sudden, we had planes hit the towers. The towers fell. And everyone just forgot about the Pentagon missing trillions of dollars. And this is what happens. This is a distraction. This is what they tried to do. And to distract against all these lies, what they're going to do is they're going to create an event. They're going to create this incredible event, which will lead to war. And once we're in this war, people will completely forget about everything else. And they do believe once the war is complete, they will emerge from their bunkers and they will restart the system. People will forget everything else from before. They'll think, okay, let's start the economic system once again. We have reduced population and we're good to go. And this is what they're planning on right now. This is what they're trying to do. And they won't stop until they get there. And we've been tracking what they've been doing for quite a while. I mean, they've been moving military assets all around the world, military troops. We see the US Navy, well, they're going to be visiting New Zealand next month for the first time since 1980. For 30 years, there's been a stalemate between the US and New Zealand because New Zealand banned nuclear warships. Now, they're going to be letting the US Navy bring one of their ships into this area. Now, of course, as we know, the US most likely has been working with New Zealand because this is another strategic area. They would like to have access to their ports. They would like to have access to all the countries encircling China. And we see right now, this is one of their moves. Out in Ukraine, we see things are really heating up. I mean, it's getting out of control right now. The Ukrainian military, they have launched over 150 artillery shells into the Donetsk People's Republic area. Now, everyone is saying the Minsk deal is dead, but we can see the Normandy 4, which is Poroshenko, Angela Merkel, President Hollande, and Putin. They're meeting on October 19th to try to get things back on track. Now, are we going to see things back on track? Most likely not, because the United States, they're pushing for this war. They don't want the Minsk agreement to go forth. They want a war there. They want a war in the Middle East. They want a war in the South China Sea, because they're planning on fighting these enemies, which they're really not enemies. The U.S. is making them into enemies. So we can see right now the United States government central bankers, they're all over the world. We have soldiers garrisoned in many, many countries around the world, just like Rome. And we can see that the U.S. uses terrorism in each one of these countries, especially in Africa. We've been seeing that all these different terrorist groups, they appear, then the U.S. says, we'll come in and help you, and this is how they are able to bring in military equipment, soldiers, and garrison the countries. Russia realizes what's going on. China does realize what's going on. They've been working with African countries, and we see Russia right now has conducted its first ever military exercises in Africa, Operation Defenders of Friendship. And this is a joint Russian-Egyptian military exercise. And really what it is an anti-terrorist exercise, and that's what they're doing in Africa right now. Because they realize what the U.S. is doing in Africa, how they're creating these terrorist groups to allow the U.S. military in there to garrison the country, to take control of the country. We've seen it in many of the countries throughout Africa. And always on the other side is China and Russia. And Russia has been removing the terrorists in the Middle East, and a lot of these African countries are saying, can you come down here and help us remove the terrorists in our countries? Because we can see right now, America starts the war on terror, but Russia finishes the job. And this is what other countries are seeing right now. So we see the United States government central bankers, they're losing their hold around the world. Things are rapidly deteriorating economically. Things are rapidly deteriorating politically, geopolitically. And they only have one option left. And we all know what that is. It's war. Now, out in Yemen, we understand that the situation there is not going well for the U.S. government central bankers. It's not going well for Saudi Arabia. And we understand that the U.S. is getting prepared and ready to go into Yemen. And they asked for a ceasefire. And right now they got the 72-hour ceasefire, which will begin in Yemen on Wednesday night. And we always know how these ceasefires go. Saudi Arabia doesn't abide by it. They start bombing once again, and then the ceasefire is completely off. But we can see at this point they want the ceasefire because they want to regroup. And when I say they, it's the United States government central bankers. They always like to call a ceasefire when they're losing. When they're winning, they don't need the ceasefire. But what's very interesting about all of this, and we know when we looked at the situation where these missiles were fired at the USS Mason, we said right off the bat, this has to be a false flag, because why would the Houthis decide to invite the United States into Yemen? It makes no sense. That wouldn't benefit them. They want the United States out of their country. They want the puppet government out of their country. And now the Pentagon is completely backtracking. They're saying this might have been a radar malfunction. The radar might have detected something, an anomaly or something, and we're not really sure what happened there. Well, I'll tell you what happened. You got caught in a lie. And now you're trying to backtrack, trying to figure out what can we say to cover this entire thing up. Because their real mission was to use this false flag to destroy their radar sites and start a ground invasion into Yemen. But they were called out on it. We see the battle in Mosul is happening right now. Many of the residents are saying that the Islamic State, they're using the civilians as human shields. And we see right now the U.S. troops, they're on the front lines. And of course, here's another lie. There'll be no boots on the ground. Our soldiers are not going to be in combat. And we see there's over 6,000 or so permanent soldiers, way above the 4,500 or so allowed in the country by the treaty that the United States has with Iraq. But the rest of the soldiers, they're all temporary, which are not counted under the treaty because, they're just temporary soldiers and they'll be leaving very soon. And we can see right now that the United States, they're on the front lines. Special forces are being used as forward air controllers, and they're calling the targets of where the U.S. should fire the missiles from the planes. And what they're doing is they're picking targets to help the Islamic State leave this area and to escape into Syria. Now, what is happening here is that Syria and Russia, they realize this is what's happening. And Syria is out there. They're saying that the U.S.-led coalition, they're allowing the Islamic State flee into Syria across the border of Iraq and Syria. Russia says they are ready to take military decisions in the event that they do spot these Islamic State militants crossing the border. They will be destroyed. Now remember, they're doing this because they're trying to move their paid mercenary soldiers from Iraq into Syria to help out in Aleppo. And at this point, unless they're airlifted out, it doesn't look like they're going to get there, because we can see right now, Aleppo, it's almost done here. Russia and Syria almost have complete control. We see the terrorist groups inside of Aleppo, al-Nusra, the moderate rebels, al-Qaeda, they are shelling and they're hitting civilians. There are 27 injured civilians, and there are children that are included in this. And we know that the terrorists, they don't care about the people of Syria. They could care less about that. And we see the Russian UN envoy, he is out there, Vitaly Churkin, and he's saying, listen, al-Sham and all the other terrorist groups, they must voluntarily leave eastern Aleppo. If they don't, they will be annihilated. It makes no difference. So leave now or be destroyed. And we can see right now, this is the United States government central bankers' worst nightmare. They're going to lose Aleppo, a strategic location, and the Islamic State is completely wiped out. They're hitting their terrorist groups that they use to fight against the Syrian government troops. The whole entire thing is completely falling apart. Now, Russia has declared a ceasefire for 48 hours to allow humanitarian aid to come in, to allow the terrorists to leave, and already we're getting word that the terrorist groups are saying, we reject the offer. We're not leaving. We see the US and the UK, they reject the Russian offer of a ceasefire. They said it will not help. They need a longer period of time. 48 hours is not enough. They need a longer period of time to bring in the humanitarian aid. Well, they're giving them 48 hours to get the terrorists out of there, to get the civilians out of the area so they can take control of Aleppo. The United States government central bankers, they want a prolonged ceasefire to regroup. And Russia realizes this, and they're not going to let them have this. Now, something very interesting happened on the battlefield inside of Syria. A U.S. Army Special Forces that were deployed in northern Raqqa was killed by an unknown assailant. He was shot in the head. And we can see at this point, if the U.S. does come out with this information, they might be planning on blaming this on Syria or Russia. Now, of course, as we know, the United States government central bankers, the military inside of Syria, they're there illegally. They invaded a sovereign country. Syria never invited them in. So will they make this a big deal? I don't think so, because it would call attention that there are a lot more soldiers inside of Syria. The United States is building bases inside of Syria, which is completely against international law. And we see right now that the United States, they've been doing this for quite a while. And there's a reason why they're doing it, because they're preparing and getting ready for something completely different here. Now, we know what is coming up this fall. And Martin Armstrong was out there, and he is looking at the situation about what is happening with the elections. And the U.S. government central bankers, they have set the stage to blame Russia for a Trump victory. So if the poll results come out and the people decide, okay, we want Trump as president, we can see at this point that most likely they're going to say there was a cyber attack and these election results, we can't work with them. They're flawed. They're unreliable. And he came up with two scenarios. That if this does happen, Obama would declare martial law, suspend the Constitution, and remain the president, declining Hillary and Trump to move into the White House. And then he would step aside and hand it to Joe Biden. He would then throw it to Congress by means of electoral college, and that way keep it under the pretense of being constitutional. Remember, the United States Electoral College is the body that actually elects the president and vice president of the United States every 4 years. The electors are apportioned to each of the 50 states in addition to District of Columbia. The number of electors is determined by population and thus is equal to that state's number of members of Congress. There is no constitutional or federal law that compels an elector to honor any pledge. And most likely, the Electoral College will do whatever they want. Because you have to remember how this works. Even if the popular vote is in favor of Trump, the Electoral College says, okay, you know something? We want Hillary. That's the president. Now, if this does happen, we know there's going to be problems around this country. And I think this is a scenario that they're betting on, where people will riot, or if they're not rioting, they're going to start it with agent provocateurs. This way he can declare martial law. Because if you really look back at the 2000 presidential election between Bush and Gore, Gore actually won the popular vote with 48.4% and Bush at 47.9%. But the electoral college was 271 for Bush and 266 for Gore. So it didn't matter what the people wanted. The electoral college actually decides who's going to be president. And we can see there are many different scenarios. One, where the spread is so huge, where maybe, Trump has 60 or 70% and Hillary has 30 or 40%. This is going to be very, very difficult, even for the Electoral College, because the people are saying they want something completely different. So they might say that these numbers are completely flawed, they were cyber attacked, and we need to blame Russia. And this is when they'll start the war. If it's close enough, and even if the popular vote shows that the people want Trump and the Electoral College votes for Hillary, they're going to use martial law anyhow, because they're going to have agent provocateurs create these riots around the country, and they're going to hope, and they're going to create the instance of that the country is in a state of emergency. So we can see there are many different scenarios out there, and many of these could come true during this process. And that brings us to what is happening with the United States and Russia, because the U.S. is blaming Russia for a cyber attack. And now we know that Obama has instructed the CIA to prep for a cyber attack against Russia. Now, they're planning this. This is in the planning stages. It doesn't mean they're doing it this second. But during this election process, they most likely will make the decision, depending on how everything is going, to use this option. We're already at Defcon 3. And when you look at Defcon 3, it means that the military readiness at accelerated levels, they're on alert for mobilization. If we move to 2, and let's say we go ahead, and I say we, the U.S. government, central bankers, the CIA, NSA, they decide to cyber attack Russia, most likely they'll move to Defcon 2. Very high readiness, complete military ready to attack within 6 hours. That means we are one click away from Defcon 1, which is maximum alert, nuclear war imminent. So this is something to watch, because it all depends on how things go in the next couple of weeks. And we will be able to see how this entire thing plays out. Because we know the establishment, the globalists, the elite, the central banks, they're going to do everything in their power to keep their power. They don't want their power taken away. And when this is all said and done, most likely we'll have martial law. We'll be at Defcon 2. We'll be hours away from a major war. And this will not be good for everybody. Because once we slide into this area that they want us to go, it will mean death. It will mean a bloody war. It will mean that everything will never be the same. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.